So I want to welcome everyone to our third webinar of our winter webinar series. We've had a great couple to start us and get us kicked off in this series, and we've not only seen great attendance, but even better after the fact, we're seeing lots and lots of views on the recorded versions that we are making of these webinars on our YouTube channel at Pike Walk, Nebraska. So we are super excited, and that also cues me to just remind everyone on here that we are recording this. So just so everyone is made aware, we are recording. Again, thanks for joining us. I'm Julie Harris with Pike Walk, Nebraska. Very excited to have our guests today to talk about all things data. We're just going to geek out on data and how to find it and what's available and what it looks like. We know that any more data is being used more and more to make important decisions when it comes to our safety of our streets, of our intersections, of what projects get selected and what projects are considered. So, you know, as Mike Bloomberg said, in God we trust, but everyone else bring data. So, you know, for those of us who are looking to find some ways to make the case for safer streets, we're going to find out today. Got some great tools available to make that happen. I want to remind you as well that you can find all kinds of information about our organization at bikewalknebraska.org. Keep an eye on the admitting room here. If you'd like to become a member or give a donation, we'd sure love to have that. So check us out there. Our format today will be each presenter is going to take about 20 minutes, give or take, to go over the slides that they've prepared. And then we'll do question and answer at the end. So save your questions or put them in the chat box. And we will, as you think of them, and we'll get to those at the end and let our hosts interact with you a little bit more. So today we have James Boerner from the Metro Area Planning Agency in Omaha. He is a planner there. And we also have Don Butler, who is a traffic engineer with Nebraska Department of Transportation and the Highway Safety Office. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jim, and we're going to get started here. So Jim, let me get you so that you can share your screen. I think you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, certainly. I will get set up here. Thank you, Julie, again for the invitation to come and present, and wanted to let you know, and for those attending, that I'm very excited to have this opportunity. Hopefully now you see my slides on the screen. Somebody wants to give me a, a nod one way or the other. Great. So we're going to talk about MAPA Safety Dashboard. I'm going to go through an agenda, but I'll give a quick introduction here. This is really kind of the result of 3 years of hard work of working with the Nebraska and Iowa State Departments of Transportation on how we look at and talk about our crash data, and really kind of over the last 2 years of building this tool. So I am first and foremost going to tell you, I'm going to show you something that plenty of other people need to take credit for that are much smarter than I, but we're making use of the GIS platform, and we're going to show you our safety dashboard today. Also, thank you, Julie. We kind of mentioned Crashboard is a unique term, and I think it does describe it pretty well. I have a disappointed coworker that found out you had stolen the term before he was able to copyright it. So here's what I'd like to talk with.
I can't imagine who that might be.
I bet you can guess. So doing this in a webinar format, it's a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to tell you things, and you may be familiar with MAPA, and if you are, hopefully you'll bear with me, but I want to give some context into what we look to measure and why we do it, and how we present it, and really to let you know that although we're 2 years in, we see this as we're just starting. So we would like to take any feedback, I guess, that you have. That's a big part of our role. I'm going to go away from slides. We're going to go to the website where you can, show you where you can access this data and give an example. And then really would like to open it up to questions. And I think what we'll talk about here will be good. What I'll talk about with Don's presentation following me, I work very closely with him and with Julian and others that I've seen here in the webinar. So really it's that collaborative planning effort that this tool is a result of. So MAPA is a council of governments. We've been around since 1967, and we really look to, as a fairly small organization, provide big impact to local communities. So as a council of government for the greater Omaha area, and what you see shown here in the map, we exist to provide local governments with planning and technical support. We're thinking regionally and long range on the core issues that impact the vibrancy of the greater Omaha Council Bluffs area. That will be my last red script, but you'll see that on the wall if you walk into our offices, and you'll see that in the opening chapter of our long-range transportation plan. So those regional issues that you can't solve and that need to be thought about regionally really are those ones listed here, and we're primarily going to be talking about transportation, but MAPA does more than that, and I guess that was a point I wanted to make. More to a point, we also function as a metropolitan planning organization, and this is based upon the population of the Omaha area. And this is, as with the Council of Governments, there are federal mandates that we follow, and there's a process that we go about. So we are first and foremost looking at and conducting performance-based planning and programming. And in the past couple of years, what was mandated, I guess, really so that each state by state can talk about things such as traffic safety, infrastructure, and truck and travel time reliability on a common playing field. We've all adopted a standard set of looking at performance measures, and along with those performance measures, setting targets. So a couple buzzwords again that I'll use, and I've already used on a couple cases. We follow a continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive planning process. So we don't do it alone by any means, and we work with representatives of all the states or counties and cities that you see depicted on the map in what's called a traffic management area. And we do this performance-based planning as a part of our day-to-day job. So for traffic safety and with all of these, the mandate is for the state departments of transportation to identify these performance measures and to adopt and set at the state level the means by which they're going to track and report on these. However, as a metropolitan planning organization, or I'll use the abbreviation MPO from now on, we're given the option to choose to set targets for our own that are more representative for our regional area. And just given the nature of the Omaha Council Bluffs area, we have chosen to do that for two of the three listed here. So traffic safety and truck and travel time reliability. Again, we do that in very close cooperation with the departments of transportation in Nebraska and Iowa, and also our local cities, but we do set performance measures and targets. So getting a little bit more into the weeds here, those performance measures that we do track for safety, we set and evaluate annually. We just went through a process where we evaluated our performance and set new targets a couple of weeks ago. And we look at those on 5-year rolling averages. So I think you're probably, unfortunately, very comfortable looking at data where, number of cases, for example, per day, and then there's that rolling average, typically a 7-day rolling average or something that you'll see that allows you to flatten out those numbers, because as with disease, with crashes, it's a probabilistic kind of problem that we're trying to track. So although there's causes of crashes, there's also just statistical chance associated there. And so we look to follow a process. So in this case, because of the nature of crashes, we do that on a 5-year rolling average. And we look at number of fatalities, number of serious injuries, and that more specifically are suspected serious injuries. And then we look at it by rate of fatality. So we express basically the amount of traffic in a region in terms of vehicle miles traveled. And because there are so many vehicles, we really have to talk about it in large numbers. So we look at it per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And then finally, we look at non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries. We combine those. They're a smaller group, but also, obviously, there are different things that we need to take a look at in consideration for solving some of our safety issues. But we also, unfortunately, don't have yet a good way to measure volumes of bicyclists or volumes of pedestrians, although we are coming along on a number of tools, both to actually count and then models to do predictions. We don't have a rate for this performance measure yet. All right, so a couple of points I wanted to make on the dashboard before we dive in with an example. The data that we take and provided by the Nebraska and Iowa Departments of Transportation is their crash data. The standard, or I would say what's normal for reporting is you talk about crash-based. So if a crash occurs and there's one fatal injury, one suspected serious injury, and a number of other minor injuries, for example, that would be at one crash. We pull that data apart because we want to talk about individual injuries and we want to put them at a location. So we do some data standardization on our side so that it can be shown in a map. It's location based. And because there's that data adjustment, we're really now talking about a snapshot. So if updates are made to Nebraska or Iowa, they won't be reflected here until we go about making another update in coordination with the states, which we do right now on an annual basis. So we also work very hard. There's no personally identifiable information here. We're protecting the livelihoods and of the people who are unfortunately caught up in these instances. And I'll get into it later, but when I use circumstances, there's a little bit of variation in how Nebraska and Iowa report or talk about crashes. And so we've grouped some of those together so that they're consistent when you see them on the screen, and also so you're not overwhelmed by a huge amount of information. And I'll save that, I think, for the example to give more information there. So finally, I took a look at your Twitter, Julie, and took a look at the things that maybe Bike Walk Nebraska people would be familiar with, and I took this report. So I'm going to use it really as an example of characteristics that you can right now use to filter data in our dashboard. I'm not by any means commenting upon the quality or the validity of the data, nor am I doing a follow-on test, but really want to just kind of show you the things that we can do. So we're going to take a look at pedestrian crashes and look at multi-lane roadways. We won't get as specific as 5+ lanes, but we can generalize that. We can definitely talk about speed limits where crashes occur. And then we'll show you some tools that we're using right now for traffic volumes, and maybe some other tools that don't sit in the dashboard, but we'll definitely be looking to talk more about things in particular. Low-income neighborhoods or other communities of concern will be part of a safety report we'll put out later this year. So I think the best way, I'm going to stop sharing here briefly. All right, can everybody see serious and fatal crashes, the dashboard here?
Right now, it looks like we're seeing your home page or just your laptop.
There we go.
There you go.
This will be better. Okay, great. So we're going to go clockwise here and kind of talk about how the data works and what you're looking at. So again, I said that these are location-based. The map provides a frame for the data that you're looking at. So real quickly, 259 auto fatalities from 2015 to 2019. But if you say zoom in, you're only going to show in this counter those which lie within the screen. So it allows you to do some zooming in to look at an area, and really to adjust all of the other dashboard screens that you see here. We talked about the MPO and our boundaries, and that you can roughly see here. We've got Douglas County, Sarpy County, Pottawatomie, and there's just a tiny little portion of Cass County here along Highway 75. And if you wanted to, you could do a filter. You know, for example, if you wanted to just look at Douglas County, you can do that. You notice that the bars here changed, the numbers changed. And for a majority of these pie charts, they'll change. There's one that alcohol and drug use is just looking at the entire data set. It isn't screened out by your other filters. But then if you wanted to only focus on fatalities, for example, in Douglas County, we could do that. We're talking pedestrians, so you can very quickly get to pedestrian fatalities. And then if you wanted to single out a year, we could do the same thing. So really pretty quickly, you can take what's a lot of data that you're looking at and filter it down to things that you think are important for you. So to get back out, you can just click back on it again, and it's going to turn those off. All right, almost. Okay, so within the map itself, under the data, you'll see various thicknesses of lines. These are representative from our traffic volume data. So these are expressed in terms of AADT, or annual average daily traffic. And if you forget what those terms are, you can take a look here. You can pull up the legend and you can see what you're looking at, fatalities, serious injuries, but also to get a sense for those traffic volumes. So we talked before, one of those screening metrics in that paper was 25,000 vehicles per day, which is not quite the same as AADT, but we're not going to belabor the point right now. But just knowing that they're fairly high volume roadways. All right, so on the bar graphs themselves, you can look at all activity if you wanted to, again, break it out by fatal, serious, or non-motorist. And these generally show you those trends that we were talking about. Now, these are actual counts. These aren't our performance measures. The performance measures, of course, would be a 5-year rolling average of this data. But it does give you a sense for how, as a region, we're performing, and things that we can do to make it a safer place to drive or walk or ride your bike. Finally, down in the age category, this is the age of the individual who was injured. A lot of the tracking that we do also looks at age of driver, but in this case, this would be the injured individual. And really, I think the next thing I want to break out, functional classification, is how we designate roadways within our region. There's a loose tie-in generally between how that roadway is classified and the characteristics that it has. So for example, other principal arterial and minor arterial are going to be our larger roadways. They're Dodge Street, they're West Maple Road, or pardon me, they're Maple Street, not West Maple Road, past 680, but they're not I-680, they're not I-80, they're not our interstates. Those are our other freeways and expressways. So I'm going to kind of show this first filter here. We talked about roughly in that report, they looked at roadways that have over 25,000 vehicles per day and over 5 lanes that pedestrians would have to cross. So I'm just going to select these two. So these are showing crashes on those major roadways. Minor arterials oftentimes aren't going to get all the way into 25,000 vehicles per day. So we'd have to do some filtering there. But generally, what I wanted to show first were kind of these roadways. We then talked about speed limit. And of course, oftentimes those things go hand in hand. So we want to show everything that goes up to 30 miles per hour. So again, we'll just kind of select those here. and we've got our 25 and 30 miles per hour. So that network that we're talking about starts to disappear. And I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. We're going to go over 30 miles per hour. And I'm going to choose not to go to 60 because that's not representative of the roadway networks that we were talking about here. And then finally, contributing circumstances. So this collects all the characteristics that we think are representative and that we would want to talk about to contextualize the crashes in our area. So there are things like the first one here, failure to yield. If somebody's operating a vehicle in an erratic manner, and they start to give some sense to the cause of the crash, to the nature of the crash, but by no means is this a detailed analysis. It just is a way to kind of generalize and talk big numbers. If there are pedestrian and bicycle related crashes, there's also information that comes from that side of the crash report. So there's things that would then talk about whether they're improperly crossing the roadway, for example, or if they were in a crosswalk. So there's data about the individual. So it's not only about the driver and the car characteristic, there's also some limited information about what happened in that crash occurrence. Again, it is not by any means a detailed crash assessment, but it is providing context. Okay, so we're going to close out here. I'm going to quickly go to pedestrian. And so really looking at pedestrian fatalities kind of from that hotspot analysis fairly quickly. We made a couple selections in our dashboards and we're able to narrow it down to numbers and to kind of show a location for these crashes over the period of 2015 to 2019. One of the things that the report did mention, and I'd have to go back and look at it, I didn't write it down exactly, but as we look at pedestrian injuries, what's very clear, and fatalities in particular, is they're making up a larger percentage of overall crashes and fatal crashes. So I had run the numbers fairly quickly for 2015 to 2019. We see about 15.1% of those fatalities coming from pedestrians, and what that report, studying a much broader area of the United States, showed about 16. So unfortunately, we're kind of on par in that respect as well. So I think following the guidance that you had given, Julie, I am done talking here. So if maybe if we want to just shift over to Don's presentation, we can go through examples at the end. I'm happy to do that.
Great. Thank you. I could get on that and just dink around with all those different settings all day long. That's really, really amazing. We'll be sure if you have questions to stick them in the chat box. We'll get to those at the end. But Don, if you want to go ahead and start to share your screen, you should be able to do that. There you go. We're good.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with your group. My name is Don Butler. I am the Highway Safety Engineer for Nebraska DOT. Every day I wake up and I try to save someone's life, someone that I will probably never meet. Some days I succeed and most days I don't. But what keeps me going is good people that really care about safety, like Jim and Julie, and really good safety partners at the community level, local, state, and federal level that come up with clever ways to look at the same kind of problems and look at new ways of approaching it and improving safety for all of the users in Nebraska that use our roadways to travel. Today I'm going to talk about crash data and then some other pedestrian and bicycle safety related initiatives that NDOT is participating in and supporting. MAPA is leading the way in crash data dashboarding in our area. Nebraska DOT hasn't created any yet. We are working on that. Should be available later this year, I think. But I'll start off with a little bit of crash history, and then I'll pivot to what we call the Nebraska Transportation Information Portal. It's a map of our crash data. Instead of looking at a lot of graphs, it's a lot of dots on a map. A little update on some report information, and then some safety initiatives later on. So to start off with, Nebraska, from a bicycle and pedestrian safety perspective, is actually doing pretty well. We are one of the top 3 states with the lowest pedestrian fatalities per capita in the last 10 years. And twice we were actually the lowest in the country. So we're doing pretty well. That doesn't mean that we can't get better. We need to keep pushing and getting better. Every bicycle and pedestrian fatality is more than is acceptable. We had 2 bicycle-involved fatal crashes in the last 3 years. And the good news is that the work that we're doing is paying off. We're averaging 3 fewer non-motorist fatalities and serious injuries per year, so they are going down. But that's because we have to keep pushing and keep doing better. So I'll start off with data. The data that drives the dashboards that Jim presented on. It takes a lot of effort to pull that together. That's when a crash occurs, an officer will go out and fill out a report. If someone was injured, or if there was more than $1,000 of damage to any one person's property. And then all drivers involved in that crash will complete a driver's report. And there's a link on there for how to submit that and more information there. What my office does is we receive that report from the officer. We match up the investigator's report with the driver's report. We all look at it holistically. We will locate that crash on a map, and we'll do some quality control, some accuracy checks, and look for duplicates. And then the DMV uses that also to check for vehicle information. Over there is shown a map of all the crashes across Nebraska. There are roughly 35,000 per year, so there's a lot of work that goes into this. What we do now is we compile this information to a lot of reports. On our NDOT's crash data website, you can find the annual crash facts report, some standard summaries, some specialty reports from our Highway Safety Office, and then we also have reports for our daily and monthly fatalities that we send out to the media. So what we've done is we realized that tables and reports weren't good enough. We needed to look at things more visually, more spatially. So we created the Nebraska Traffic Information Portal, actually for internal NDOT use. We were trying to get our engineers and our analysts a better way to look at the same problem that we've always been facing. And when we realized that this would be very useful for our partners that we talk with when we go to the community, when we talk with other agencies. And we realized we really need to make this available on a grander scale to our partners in the public. And so we worked with our legal team, and they gave us the okay to make this public. So this data is available to the public as soon as it's available to NDOT. Currently, there's a slight lag because we're switching databases, but once we get that really linked up, as soon as we get the data, the public gets to see it as well. What we have available is you can search. You can, instead of looking at all crashes across the state, you can search by date, by location, by highway, by city, by county, and different involvements, like you're only focused on motorcycles or pedestrians, different types of lighting conditions, weather, things like that. So a lot of really good tools for digging into the data. We also, working with Federal Motor Carrier, we added in inspection data from commercial vehicles. Not very important for this community group, but it is useful for some of our other partners, and we're looking at adding more and more data to make this more useful as people start using it. So I'm going to jump into the actual demonstration. So I'll start off here. I queried just 1 year's worth of data of crashes in Omaha area, and you can see there's a lot going on. People crashing into each other a lot. There's a lot of people driving around, and how we might distill this down deeper is to slice it a little differently. For example, I'll go to Omaha. I want to see all the pedestrian crashes in the Omaha area. And so this kind of cuts it down to something a little more manageable, something to focus on. And you can see that some of the concentrations of crashes along certain corridors where there's higher traffic volumes and maybe higher pedestrian traffic. And if I zoom in, let's say I'm focused on a particular corridor, let's say this Dodge Road, I can click on an individual dot. Each of those dots is a crash or a clustering of crashes, and it gives some information about this particular crash. This was an injury crash, tells you about the date, time, and if there's alcohol involved, what the weather was, and it also gives us a crash key. Currently, it's not linked to anything, but we're going to make it link to our investigators reports portal, so that you can click on this and actually go purchase the report and look at the actual report from the officer. And so it directly gives you access to look for and find information that you need to understand what's going on in your local community. So another way you might look at that is if I go here under involvement, so in Omaha, instead of pedestrians, I looked at bicycles. And so here's where all the bicycle involved crashes occurred in Omaha in 2020. And from this, we can look at corridors to focus on. So you can see there's some kind of clustering here, or maybe because there's some trails, right? That's why we're seeing, because that's where people are biking. So these are ways that we as NDOT and our partners can look at this data and find ways that the data can lead us to opportunities to improve safety. So I'll go back to my presentation. Update, that data that's shown there is as of the end of 2020, we're switching to a new data format. We just switched it on January 1st. The new format is meeting the national standard for crash data called the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria. And what that does is it unifies our data sets with other states, and so it makes Jim's job easier by making it all very similar. It also makes sure that we're capturing a larger group of data that gives us a better understanding of crashes. So some things that are different, like for example, now officers can indicate more about were they texting and driving, were they talking on the phone, some more details about what the driver is doing to help us understand what we need to target for enforcement or education purposes. Other information about traffic incident management to make clearing our roads easier and safer. New things like autonomous vehicle information, as well as we added some new non-motorist crash details that help us analyze those types of crashes better at a higher level. And then once we've got the finishing up our database work, we'll have some dashboards that we'll leverage this data for the public to use and look somewhat similar to the work that Jim's doing. So I want to show you the kind of things that we're going to start collecting going forward. This is for non-motorist type crashes. So if a vehicle strikes a pedestrian or bicyclist, this is a little more information about what the non-motorist was doing. Were they walking in the street? Were they crossing? Were they waiting for traffic? Were they going to school? Were they waiting for transit? Were they in a crosswalk? Were they walking, mid-block where there's not a crosswalk? What this does is it allows us to analyze holistically at a higher level. Is there an issue where people are crossing mid-block and there's crashes occurring where maybe we should look at putting in a mid-block marked crossing so that we can make that safer? Right now, we have dots on a map and we can go read each individual report, but with it can be very tedious and not very efficient. And so this will help us start leveraging and looking at some patterns going forward. And once we identify these patterns, we have a tool set that we can use. It's called the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian. This is a Federal Highway Administration initiative that Nebraska DOT and a lot of local municipalities in Nebraska are participating in it. And this is really a tool set of ways to improve safety for pedestrians. We have some signing options, like for example, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which is kind of a typical crosswalk sign, but has a beacon that's activated that will flash rapidly in a specific pattern to help warn drivers that someone's gonna be crossing there. Other things like adding a pedestrian refuge island for some of those roadways with more lanes, like for example, Jim was talking about 5+ lanes. Adding that refuge island in the middle makes it safer and more comfortable for pedestrians and bicyclists to cross. Other things like shrinking the number of lanes. Some of these areas, you know, it may not be as appropriate anymore for 4 or 5 lanes. It makes more sense to go down to fewer lanes, make that traveling distance shorter and safer for pedestrians. Also, adding things like lighting helps. Part of the analysis to identify pedestrian-involved crashes at night. That's an opportunity. Other things like leading pedestrian interval. What this does is it gives additional time for pedestrians to cross at the beginning of a traffic signal cycle, so that they can clearly get into the crosswalk and be visible to left turning or right turning vehicles. So they're less likely to get struck because of visibility issues. So those are some of the tools that we use once we've identified opportunities to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety based on the crash data portal that I presented earlier. I'm going to pivot to the last thing I always talk about for a presentation. It's an initiative that we have at Nebraska DOT called Buckle Up, Phone Down. Many of us are aware that with the prevalence of cell phones, everybody has them nowadays. People have become complacent and okay with texting and driving or talking on the phone. And so we just want to remind people that the 2 best things you can do to keep yourself and people in your community safe is by buckling up when you're driving and putting that phone down so you can keep your focus on the roadway, so you can look for bicycles, pedestrians crossing the roadway, and other vehicles. And we've done some new, different kind of targeted messaging. We know that people that maybe texting more or doing other sort of phone-based activities while driving are a little bit different demographic than we maybe used to. And so we've got some interesting ways of reaching out to them, some clever things to reach out to those groups, such as this poster here. So it's a different way of approaching the safety, and we're hoping that it'll catch on and people will engage in improving safety in this way. And so we've got some business partners and some schools that have signed on already, and we're encouraging any group that's interested in safety to reach out to us and take on the challenge. You know, be willing to say, yeah, I'm going to buckle up and put my phone down when I'm driving and in a vehicle, so that I can keep myself, my family, and my community safer. So that's what I had for my presentation, Julie. Here's my contact information at the end. Feel free to reach out to me to talk about pedestrian safety and bicycle safety. And I'm always looking for interesting and ways of improving safety, and willing to hear your ideas. So thank you.
Great. Good job. Thanks so much, Don. That was really interesting. You know, what you said just right off the top about how you wake up every day and it's your goal that hopefully that nobody dies, that it's your goal, you keep everybody safe. And that's good to know. We appreciate that mindset very much. And we appreciate your information here. Okay, let's start with questions and answers. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box, and I will try to keep an eye on those. And I have a couple of questions of my own in the meantime. You know, I'm going to start with you, Don. I'm wondering about, you know, you talked about the toolkit at the end on the different things that we can do on the keeping pedestrians safe, whether it's rapid flashing beacons or signage or crosswalk medians or whatever. Is there a way that you plan to tie different data to that? In other words, is there a way we can be more proactive and not wait until there are serious injuries and fatalities? Is there a way that you look at the data of where people are biking and walking and being proactive on what we might be able to do ahead of time to make it safer?
Sure. As part of our highway safety improvement program, we analyze crash patterns across the state, looking for higher crash locations or unique patterns of crashes that tend to have higher severities. And so we do look for a lot of places. Recently, I partnered with MAPA to do a kind of a corridor analysis on Maple Street in the Omaha area, where we had a couple of block talks with the community. That was mostly led by MAPA, but supported by Nebraska DOT. Look at, it was a corridor that we're seeing a pattern of crashes. So what can we do to improve those areas? So yeah, we are doing that. We're actively doing that. It's very much a data-driven process. That's why we build some of these tools. We follow the data, and it tells us where we need to be improving safety.
Yeah, and that brings me to my second question, which is about collecting the data. Hopefully all good. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry, I had a weird message on my screen. You know, making sure that we have the most accurate data possible is one of the things that I personally am most concerned about. Making sure that we are collecting the right kind of data and as much as we can so that we can make the best decisions. We know from many studies that bike and pedestrian crashes are pretty underreported generally to start with. And we know that there are many, many near misses and other situations that could have been very fatal had one tiny little thing gone different. How can we improve bicycle and pedestrian crash reporting to make sure that we have the right data to make the right decisions?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because our safety improvement processes are data driven. Without good data, we don't make good decisions, right? And so I definitely encourage anybody who is involved in a crash that you get it reported by an officer and make sure the driver fills out a driver's report. The minimum threshold is injury or $1,000 worth of damage. If I'm walking and somebody hits me with a car, I'm probably got injured. Even if I may not be visibly injured, I probably had some sort of bruising, at the very least, some sort of minor injury. It may not seem like a lot. You may just kind of brush it off, say, I'm okay, I'm in a hurry to get somewhere. Take the time to get that reported. We use every single report that we get sent. Every single one of them we use for analysis. I don't throw a single one away. Every one of them is important. And so make sure it gets reported. If you get hit, I want to make sure that you feel that you have that right and even that responsibility to make sure that it is getting reported.
Yeah, that for pedestrians, that's definitely true. I think, bicyclists as well, when you get hit on your bike, there's that moment of adrenaline, you're sort of out of sorts. You don't realize what your injury is at the moment. You might think, oh, I'm all right. And, head on to your destination. And it's not until a few hours later when your adrenaline kind of subsides that you realize, oh, wow, my head is a little dinged up or I am a little bit bruised. The other concern I have is that we're measuring the amount of damage to a car when it comes to crashes. So you don't have to fill out a report if there's less than $1,000 worth of damage, but of a car, but that doesn't, account for any damage that might happen if you're in an incident with a car with a bike or a wheelchair. And if your bike or wheelchair is damaged and it's less than $1,000 or, which in many cases, even $100 worth of damage to a bicycle or wheelchair could be could be really difficult to deal with, that those aren't getting reported. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Feel free to ask for an investigator to report that. We get investigators' reports in that technically that minimum threshold of $1,000 worth of damage to personal property, but it's still good, useful information. You know, it's at least on the side of caution. You know, it's likely, like you said, that you may not feel that injury, but you very well could be at least possibly injured, right? And so ask for that. If I'm on my bike and someone were to hit me, I probably got something, at least some scrapes or something that would be an injury. That would meet that. It may not feel like a significant injury, you know, compared to serious car crashes, but it still warrants being reported. And I recommend that. Anybody that if you're involved in a crash, ask to get it reported.
Yeah, Sarah Janiak from Lincoln brings up a good point in the chat. If I'm on my bike and I swerve and avoid getting hit, but get run off the road, it doesn't count as a crash. The car doesn't stop and the police don't write a report. This is a great example of the underreporting and maybe incomplete set of data that we have when it comes to crashes and dangerous streets.
That is a difficult one. Is that there has to be contact for it to be a crash. With a motor vehicle has to contact something for it to be a crash. And those kinds of near misses do go underreported because we don't have that mechanism for it. In many ways, that's a big hole in safety and analysis and crash data nationwide. It's a really big concern. And so we look at other ways of trying to look at risk. And so we look at the patterns that we're seeing. We know that there's a lot more out there that we aren't seeing. And then look at what can we do from exposure. We have difficulty in counts necessarily on a larger scale. We can do that at small scales. However, we are looking at ways to identify those kinds of risks so we can get past that burden of just that car contact, look at more ways of being proactive. Something happens with vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. There's a lot of near misses there. It's a big hole in the data because you're only getting the data when they actually contact, right? Mm-hmm. So we look at exposure models that help us out, that we're a little more proactive.
Great. James, coming over to you on the MAPA side, can you talk a little bit about how MAPA uses this kind of data when making decisions?
Sure, certainly. So I think I'll talk about a couple things that we do and give examples. So what I've already talked about, we do our annual reporting and we take a look at the safety performance measures and establish targets. So we're looking at regional performance as a whole. As an organization, although we do provide federal funding resources to local partners, we don't run a city, or we don't operate a safe or a state or direct enforcement, but I think we're involved across the board and a lot of organizations which do that kind of planning and that discussion. So high level, these are our performance measures, and we do set targets, and we do report those to our board and to our members. But I think there's a couple things that again, I talked about at the beginning that we're growing. So when projects are submitted for federal funding, for consideration for federal funds, one of the selection criteria are safety, and that gets into deeper analysis, kind of the things that Don's mentioned here initially. And I'm personally very excited because I think we're stepping out and doing, based upon a lot of research, building tools for people to do more predictive analysis, to take a look at those things like exposure and risk that Don's talked about, and to quantify them for projects. So even if you're going to go and do a roadway project in an area, if you don't have a lot of crash data, there's still tools that can say, based upon the characteristics of the roadway and what you want to do with it, here's improvements you will make to safety, and trying to give that some measure. So it would absolutely be used in our project selection. Don also talked about our Block Talk program. So within STEP, there's a couple parts, and one is really public engagement. So that's what a role that MAPA does play in, and we do reach out. We try to provide a forum where people can give input and live and work and use those roads. So if they're a pedestrian or a driver and they experience and understand how that roadway works. So that's important information to go into decision making as well. So we've done that on a number of cases and provided those reports back to the member communities, whether it's a neighborhood association or other nonprofit organizations that are looking at those things regionally.
Yeah, and that's a good point that, in Omaha, we're lucky that we have MAPA as a planning organization. You guys doing all the great work that you're doing. Lincoln and Grand Island, and I believe the South Sioux City area up in the corner have organizations like this that are able to do a lot of this work. But, our small communities across Nebraska don't have the advantage of having an metropolitan planning organization. So Don, what can small towns do? Small towns that have highways running through them that become main streets. How are they able to track data and try to stay ahead of the curve in terms of identifying trends and all these things that MAPA does for the Omaha region? What do smaller towns have available?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of smaller towns don't have the expertise and the resources that larger metropolitan areas do. And so Nebraska DOT helps out. We for example, the NTIP that we made available to the public is also available for across Nebraska. So local agencies that are looking to improve safety, they can use the same tool. And we're looking at building more some dashboards to make that also available. I would say the best opportunity to engage in improving safety is when roadway projects come through the area. As part of our project development process, we look at safety on every project that we do. And that's a good opportunity to engage in that conversation and talk about some of the issues that you've been seeing and really get that brought forward as part of public involvement that we do, and make the designers aware of that so that they can discuss what they can do to improve it. So those are really great opportunities to look for patterns, and then opportunities where it makes it easier to accomplish those kinds of improvements.
We have a question in the chat box from Scooter, wondering if road rage incidents are captured on any of these dashboards.
I believe aggressive driving is what it would be shown as, and I think it's one of the items on your circumstances. Is that true, Jim?
It is, yeah. We've worded that as operating vehicle in erratic manner. So, I think, again, that groups a number of circumstances, if I recall, but I wouldn't use that to just say those are road rage, but they are cases where an individual, a driver, is not operating that car well, driven by whether it's anger or whatever the case may be that has them not driving safely.
So the short answer is yes.
Thank you, Don. And I think, Don, you kind of mentioned there too, and I think taking this to the next level is just doing that. It's describing those things and having enough information, because I would say road rage, unless you're in bumper to bumper traffic, probably has things like speed as well as operating vehicle in erratic manner. It probably has, failure to yield, for example. So there's probably a combination of events that cause that driver to be so dangerous that then that crash occurred with its outcomes, if that makes sense. And although our goal with the dashboard is not by any means to characterize individual crashes and outcomes, it's to try to better understand what is going on in our region and to talk about it with respect to safety.
Good. Okay. Last call for questions in the chat box, everybody. Anybody has anything pondering in there? I will say one other thing is that I found very interesting as I get prepared to go to the National Bike or attend virtually the National Bike Summit this year, which will be in a few weeks. And I think some of you on here are signed up to participate, which is fantastic. You know, as part of that, we always get an update from the League of American Bicyclists legislative affairs guru about the federal transportation bill and kind of what's happening on the federal level. And what we're finding is that the transportation bill that's likely to come down the pike with the new Biden administration is really going to be a big improvement for biking and walking in a lot of ways, not just funding, but also looking at data and how we evaluate what type of interventions might be needed in certain places or where we're having problems. And it's really going to be very, very data driven. It's going to be, you know, looking not just at hotspots and where there are car crashes. So when I asked earlier about how can we be more proactive, you know, a lot of times now we look at streets that have a lot of car crashes and say, oh, this looks like a dangerous street, we ought to fix it. But the typical crash for a car is not necessarily on the same kind of road as the typical crash for a person on a bicycle. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what comes of that and how we will have to adjust in the data that we collect and analyze. And, you know, if we need to pivot anything in the way we do our business in Nebraska to accommodate some of those new requirements. All right, I don't see any other questions, although Scooter has made himself known to me with his identity, which I will not divulge. Great, well, I want to thank again our fantastic panelists, James Boerner from MAPA and Don Butler from NDOT. We're very grateful for the work you do. We are always very grateful for the assistance you provide whenever I need information, and I'm glad I can pick up the phone or send you an email about information I might need to do our jobs better at Bike Walk Nebraska. So we're grateful for that. As mentioned, I'll be attending the National Bike Summit with many of you coming up here in a couple of weeks, and our next webinar will be on March 10th to kind of review the aha moments and what we've learned at the National Bike Summit, and to talk more about those transportation bills coming and what we learned from our members of Congress as we had those meetings with them as part of the event. So watch your social media or your email for information on that one. It will be coming soon on how you can register for that. And with that, I will let everybody go. We've got 2 minutes to spare, so giving you 2 minutes back in your day. Thanks everyone for attending, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.